Good afternoon, everyone, and we are delighted to welcome you to this week's PMI Friday webinar, number 72, and the final PMI Friday webinar before we launch our new and exciting PMI Live series, which I'll talk to you about later on. Today's webinar, Why Toyota Consultants Struggle to Implement Change Outside of Toyota, is with myself in the facilitation seat and my good friend and colleague, Sean Buckland, in the presentation seat. So we will be, as usual, keeping these things as interactive as possible. Do use the chat, the Q&A buttons, and keep your questions and comments coming. We've got a few polls in today's webinars. And as usual, I'll put those to Sean as we progress through. For those of you joining us on the live streams, we're streaming live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You're very welcome. Great to have you with us. Please do keep your comments in the live stream feeds, and I'll be keeping an eye on those as we progress through the webinar. I will talk to you, as I mentioned, about PMI Live shortly. Before that, just a reminder that, as usual, we will send out the Voice of the Customer survey at the end of the session to all registered participants. Please keep your suggestions and feedback coming. That is now going to be for the PMI Live series. So on that note, taking everything we have done in the last 72 episodes of the PMI Friday webinar, we've listened to your feedback and we've decided to change it up a little bit. So we're calling them the new series PMI Live. And in that series, we are going for live and interactive versions of the webinars. Lots of audience participation. We'll be setting exercises, and it'll be your opportunity, depending on the topic, to put your questions to the consultants, and we'll have discussion forums within those PMI Live sessions as well. Some really exciting topics. The landing page is now live at pmi.co.uk/webinars. So get your bookings in fast and early. We'll be delighted to see you then. We'll be sending out all the comms in January, but for now, I'll leave it on that note and hand over to Sean.
Thank you very much indeed. So lovely to have you with us again today. And we've got one of my favorite topics that I'm covering here, which is around the concept of culture change. And so we'll just quickly whiz through, as we always do, the main learning topics. So there's obviously a story behind the title here, and I need to share that story with you and what it led me to think and learn and investigate for myself. We'll then be looking at lean culture and lean implementation in a standard management culture. And obviously I will define what I mean by both of those. Then I'll look at some of the breaks and the barriers that we put on with our existing management systems and how we currently manage our organizations. And then always like to do something practical and useful. I will introduce you to a tool that I myself have used in a number of occasions to help use values, cultural values, as a way to help lever cultural change, and some very practical things. And I mesh that up with some very familiar Lean Six Sigma thinking, so that hopefully it'll feel very practical and usable for yourselves as well. So one of the things I'd love to know in your feedback is whether or not this is something you think you could use, and would it be useful to you in your organization. So one definition, one disclaimer. So definition number one, management systems. I'm not referring to MIS here. I'm not referring to the IT systems, although that's clearly part of the overarching things. I'm using systems in the sense that Deming and Russell-Ackoff do. So systems thinking sense. So it's the decision-making process. It's all of the culture, the information flows, all of that kind of stuff. So when I talk about a management system, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about some IT that happens to provide useful data. Well, may hopefully provides useful data. And then the second thing is the disclaimer. Because of the scale of this topic, the concept of culture change, I'm going to have to make some generalizations along the way, and I'm not doing those to be lazy. I'm not doing those to be argumentative. Some of those generalizations, you might take a different view. You might feel that you have a different take on it, and that's absolutely great with me. And by all means, fire that into the chat as we go along. But if I do use a generalization, as I say, it's only in the interests of speed and helping you get to your weekend. And we're not quite at last minute Christmas shopping, but maybe you've got plans for something like that this weekend. Because as I did warn you, it is one of my favorite topics. I could easily be here till midnight, even if you're long gone on this one. So onto the story. I'd like to introduce you to Charlie. Charlie is somebody who used to work for Toyota here in the UK and left Toyota and set himself up as a lean consultant and picked up a very nice contract with one of the large banks that we happen to have in this country. And I was going in to help them. They'd got blocked on one particular point, and I was in there, and we were just having coffee on that first day on site. And he said this to me. He said, I feel like that bloke from Greek mythology who was punished by the gods to take the rock up a hill. And then just when I get near to the top, the rock rolls back down again and I have to go down and pick it up again. And that's the story of Sisyphus. And I don't know if anybody has ever felt like that at all with their continuous improvement activities, but that's how it felt to him. He then followed up by saying, why is it that when I was at Toyota, the methods that I used, try and use, they worked fine, but here they don't? And he would quite reasonably, because it was his first job since leaving Toyota, assumed that lean did not work in banks. And this was the conversation we had, because I'd only worked in environments, not just banks, but service environments. So I had no experience of working within Toyota, but I only had experience of getting it to work outside of Toyota. And we had quite a long conversation. And curiously enough, I had the exact same conversation with another Toyota consultant I met a couple of years later at one of the Lean Enterprise Academy conferences. So massive generalization number one, I've met and spoken to two Toyota consultants, and I'm using that as the storyline. I am absolutely certain there are plenty of very successful Toyota consultants out there, ex-Toyota people who are successful. And if you're one of those, please just jump on, just let me know that you're on the audience so that so I know we have got some ex-Toyota people coming. Let me know, Rich, if I've got anybody who's ready to.
Certainly will. You've invited some trouble there, Sean. So
I know I have.
Please do keep him going.
But absolutely, I love the dialogue. I love the discourse. Okay, so that's the basic story. And what I want to share with you is the outcome of those conversations, because they were really quite seminal for me in terms of helping me to think about how to get lean to work in the organizations I work in. And I want to share some of that with you today. So we're going to start with a poll, just to try and get a sense of what it's like at the moment for you. So how does implementing change, not only Lean Six Sigma, but especially Lean Six Sigma, for those of you involved in it, how does it feel in your organization? And you can see I've got 6 answers there. Natural, it's just the way we work. Supported, so we've got an aligned team, but it's always still seen as a bit of an extra. Patchy support, so mostly you're just left to get on with it. Pretty much unsupported, just go and fix that problem with you. Just work your magic somehow. And or poor Sisyphus there, it's all uphill. Every time you try and do something, actually find the system working back against you. Or maybe you have some other answers, and please, if you feel something describes it better, just write that into the comments section. So over to you, Rich.
Cool. So those should be on screen now. Let no one ever say we don't challenge on a Friday afternoon with some Greek mythology featuring in a story. So I can see the polls on screen. If you are joining us on the live streams, just pop your responses into the chat area. You'll be running a few moments behind the live session, so I'll pick those up as we get them. All right. And I can see that people have started responding, so that's good news. People are able to see the questions. I will shut up very shortly to enable you to focus on them, recognizing there's a lot of words on screen. Okie dokes, still see responses coming in. It's a very short pause, but those of you who've been on these sessions before know that I can't keep my mouth shut for that long. So Sean, we're just coming to the final moments of that. Just remind me, what were you hoping to get out of asking this question? What's the what's your thoughts behind asking it?
Well, if I was getting a lot of people saying it was just natural, then I would change my flavor slightly in the conversation, because what I'm talking about is where it's not actually a natural thing yet. And obviously what I want it is everybody to have a natural experience. That's exactly what I would hope for. But my experience certainly is that it's still quite a difficult challenge for people. And and I just need to know who's on the room and what they're talking about. It just gives me a sense of I guess which generalizations I shall labor on.
And okay, so on that note, be careful what you wish for. You've got it on screen now. So
Thank you.
there's the results up. So
wow.
the center here appears to be around patchy supported, largely expected to get on with it, being the verdict of this audience we've got.
Good. Well, I mean, that is actually encouraging, and I'm sure I ran something very, very similar to this quite a lot of years ago, about 15 years ago. I did a piece of research across the banking and insurance industries, and with one exception, it was all in the bottom two categories.
Right.
So I'm either we've got a very an advanced audience here on the whole, which is entirely possible, or things are improving for the better. Well, one hopes they improve for the better. Things are improving over time, and that would be great news as well. But I still think, even for the people in that supported space, I'm hoping there'll be some useful hints and so forth. For those of you natural, what I'd like those of you inspired that it's natural, by all means feed in your comments about why you think it has become natural, and whether what I'm talking about aligns to what you see has happened, or whether or not you have a different take. Because I think obviously we're always in the learning mode as well too, aren't we, Rich?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Sean mentions, just pop your comments. We really love to hear that feedback. So pop it into the chat. Or the Q&A if you've got a question. But yeah, any feedback, pop into chat. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much.
Take that off screen.
Thank you. Okay. So, right. So lean versus standard management culture. And obviously, as I say, I'm going to have to define what I mean by standard culture and lean culture. And we're straight into our next poll, just to get things started again, to get the context here. So our next one is a question. It's kind of like quiz time. Who is credited with defining the current prevailing model of management? And I put in brackets US European, because there are some other strong flavors out there. But who would you say of this list? So didn't know there was one. It's just management, isn't it? Henry Ford, Fred W. Taylor, W. Ed Deming, Peter Drucker, Jack Welch, Peters and Waterman.
Okay, great. I've released that on screen already. Yep. Just a quick poll here to see where we're at. This is a single choice question, so have your best guess.
Pick your favorite.
Sounds like my decision-making process at most times. Okay, just give that a few more seconds as you have a stab at that. Come on, get off Google, stick your answer in. Okay, great. Just give that 5 more seconds. And again, same on the live streams. Do pop your answers into the chat. Yeah. Okay.
I'm wondering if I haven't asked the question quite carefully enough, because I'm saying the prevailing model. This is the one you find in most businesses. I think I'm just having a look at some of the scores. So if any of you want to think about and maybe change your answer, I don't know if you can.
Too late. Too late.
He's closed it all down. Right.
Close it down. Stick it in the chat if you have got another suggestion. You can also offer a challenge around operational definitions here, could you not?
Indeed. Which is fair enough. Okay, so we've got a variety of responses here, but quite a few of you have gone for W. Edwards Deming, and I wish that was the case. I genuinely do, and definitely he is credited with defining the management model that is the lean management model. But the most common form of management out there is not the one that Deming asked for. In fact, he was very upset about the state of management, and it hasn't necessarily changed that much since he was complaining about it back in the 90s. So we've got a vote for Ford coming up here. We've got also votes for Taylor, votes for Peter Drucker. Okay, nobody fell into the trap of Jack Welch. But the interesting thing is, all of these people have made significant contributions to the definition of management. Henry Ford, of course, was was credited with the creation of the mass production methodology. Frederick Taylor, scientific management. which although some of the bad of that still carries on to this day, was very much part of what led into the Deming work. Deming and Schuhart, of course, the creators of the thinking behind Lean and Six Sigma in the early days. Jack Welch, very famous for making Six Sigma popular in the world, even though it was Motorola that originally started that. And then Peters and Waterman in the In Search of Excellence, which came out in the 80s, which was very influential. But the one I want to focus on is Peter Drucker, which some of you picked up on. And the reason for that is because post-war, whilst the Japanese were really struggling, hence why they invited over Schuhart and Deming, or Schuhart didn't go, Deming did. But the majority of what was happening over in the States at that point was huge amounts of mass production, and things were expanding and growing like absolutely crazy. So something was introduced back in 1954 called Management by Objectives by Peter Drucker. He wrote this book called The Practice of Management. And this is a really, really interesting book, and there's lots of good stuff in it. But let me just quickly define it. He defined the practice of management as having 5 essential steps. First of all, review the organizational goal. So if you've got an organization that's goal to be the best in such and such in the world, or the market leader in so and so, or to have twice the revenue by 2025, all of those kind of very standard goals, that's an example of management by objectives. The next step was to set the work objectives against those goals. And so if you've got the sort of organization where each of you has got your own individual personalized objectives, then you're using management by objectives. And then we have the step of the monitor the progress. So the management team is to observe whether or not those objectives are being met or not. So it's very much top-down observation. We're in charge. Are the staff doing what they've been employed to do? Are they achieving their goals? That's management by objectives. So if you've got that kind of management to relationship with the work, then that you've got MBO. Evaluation. Now, the most common form of evaluation is the personal appraisal system. Something was introduced, made very popular in the 1990s, but it absolutely falls straight out of the back of this MBO type of logic, and almost institutionalizes the top 3 above. And so if you've got performance appraisals annually or biannually, something like that, that's MBO. And finally, reward mechanisms. So incentives, punishments, if you're failing to achieve target, anything at all like that, which singles out individual performance and then either rewards or punishes on the basis of those. In other words, management by extrinsic motivation. That's all of these 5 are MBO. Now, it doesn't mean that well, certainly the top 3 are necessarily wrong or bad. In fact, those of you who are familiar with Hoshin Kanri will know that certainly the top 2 are important. The question is in the detail about what they're focused on. So that's the heart of it. Now, the interesting thing about it, of course, is Peter Drucker was a contemporary of Deming's. So Deming, when the book came out and it became very popular, Deming went on record and challenged it. And he said, the problem with this is it ignores the system. It does not focus on how the system works together. It makes the assumption that every single individual component, if it meets its individual objective, will get the whole thing to work successfully together. And Deming obviously understood that that wasn't going to be the case. And Peter Drucker watched the results of his own work because it became hugely successful, popular, etc. And 20 years later, he published an acknowledgement to say, Deming was right. Actually, we need to get the system to work together as a system. And he put those warnings out. But typical humans, by this point, we've got 2, maybe even 3 generations of managers who've come through. It's very nice. It's very clear. It's very tidy. Set the goal, set the objectives, and then give people a carrot and a stick. And we manage through this top-down view using carrots and sticks and evaluation systems. And therefore, the managers became separated from the work. And the problem is that became comfortable and familiar, which means everybody completely ignored the fact that Drucker tried to retract his work. Interesting stuff. And here we are, fast forward, not all of you, but some of you, and hopefully all of you can recognize that even if you're in the lucky position, it doesn't apply to you. that actually many organizations, many of the people you know, probably are working in organizations that are still using management by objectives. And the amazing thing is that most of the managers out there don't even know that's the theory they're following. They just think it's management, isn't it? You can imagine we could have had a very different set of results if I'd run this at a management conference instead of in the community we're part of. So what's the alternative? What's the lean management philosophy? Now, hopefully everybody on this call has heard of this before, but if not, it's useful for you to go and study. There's a link there, so when you get the connections, you can go to it, or you could look this up easily enough. Very easy to research. And there's some excellent books that cover it in more detail. I'm just going to list them very quickly. Create constancy of purpose for improving. Adopt the new philosophy, the system of profound knowledge plus the management principles I'm going through now. Cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. Sadly, 99% of the people I work with now still use inspection as the method for managing quality. End the practice of ordering business on price alone. And what we're looking for is minimize total cost by working. Deming said single supplier. Toyota and others have pushed that further now. This concept of supplier collaboratives, which is beyond where Deming had got to, but I'm trying to be true to the original words here. Improve constantly and forever every process for planning, production, and service. So that's the Taguchi loss model coming into action again there. We want on target with minimum variation for all of our value. Institute training on the job. This is Deming referencing back to the excellent work that was again also done by during the war by the American government, what's now known as training within industry, TWI. Again, if you're not familiar with that, well worth looking into. Adopt and institute leadership. Now, what Deming's referring to here is the fact the leadership of the work needs to be done by the supervisors, by the managers in the workplace. And if you ever get the chance to go and visit a Toyota plant, you'll see exactly what that looks like. And this is not the only example, but it's relatively rare still outside. More often than not, it's still about management by report and management by data, rather than the leading on the front line. Drive out fear, absolutely crucial. I'll come back to that point later. Break down barriers between staff areas, and this is about the removal of the silo mentality and the silo thinking that comes from traditional organizational design. And then eliminate slogans, exhortations, targets for the workforce. I had a manager who came to me one place I was working, he says, "Sean, you'll be so proud of us, and come and see what we've done." And at the top of the stairs, on heading up to the main management, the control center, it went, the relentless pursuit of productivity. And I had to weep inside. Eliminate numerical quotas and numerical goals for management. This is literally the exact opposite of management by objective. And a lot of people really struggle with that one because it seems so obvious that it must be a good thing to have these quotas and goals. And they don't understand the harm they're doing. And then we've got to remove the barriers that rob people of pride of workmanship. And as they eliminate the annual rating system, the merit systems. So Deming was being quite brutal with his stuff, but unfortunately, I haven't seen anything to suggest that he was wrong, and plenty suggest he was right. Into vigorous program of education, self-improvement for everyone, so make it a place where people are constantly learning and growing. Something that came out later on is the learning organization, again back to the 1990s, but still business was not ready for it. But I think one of the things I would say in the favor of the current day workplace is I think number 13 people are beginning to recognize, because we've got such mobile workforce now who can really transfer their skills around. I think businesses are recognizing number 13 finally. And then 14, put everybody to work accomplishing transformation. And that's a really important thing. So everybody's owning quality and the improvement of it. So if that's familiar to you already, apologies for that. But if it's new to you, please do go and research that in more detail, because this defines what we're trying to talk about when we talk about a lean culture. And in terms of the management mindset and the management system. Right, okay. So why doesn't lean implementation of a say a value stream improvement, or an OEE program or a SMED program or any of these kind of things, why does it not work very well within management by objective system, the MBO methodology? And this is where I'm going to make an awful lot of generalizations, but hopefully you'll bear with me. So just think about this for a moment. I'll pick on one of the, these are 40, I'm just picking on some of these. So if the management team has no constancy of purpose, first of all, what's that look like? What it means is this month's priority is not the same as next month's priority, which is not the same as the months after priority. And we're swinging all over and the goalposts keep moving. Well, you can make your own answers for this, but one example answer of, if we're trying to implement lean, how easy is it for us to get traction over time? How easy is it for us to drive continuous improvement if the priorities for what we're focusing on keep changing? And it doesn't make sense then. It's very, very difficult. And I see that I've done quite a bit of work in hospitals and so forth, and you can see time and time again, the latest government diktat comes out that means the management teams in the NHS have to just rush around and respond to that new thing, and they just can't get focused on improving the operations. Personal targets, again, this is something that's been seen for a long time as a good thing to do, but what's it doing to the lean improvement work? It's getting people to focus on themselves, and therefore they're not, you can't be focused on two things at once. It doesn't work like that. The word focus means, what is it you're concentrating on? So if I've got personal targets, I'll be focusing on me, not on the customer. Likewise, if the organization has set targets that are not necessarily aligned to the customer's needs, then the focus then becomes on how the manager and whether a manager is achieving their department's targets or so forth. Again, not on the customer. The fear or blame culture. This is, I think, one of the biggest killers. Every organization that I go into, as soon as I spot there's any kind of fear or blame, I know that I'm going to have a massive barrier. And that barrier is this: it is not safe to learn. And by learn, I mean take small risks and find out what works better versus what does not work better. And therefore, instead, people implement the CYA policy, the cover your ass policy instead. And then decision making that prioritizes cost as the priority rather than value. And what happens then is we see there's cuts go in order to save money, and then that causes all kinds of problems downstream. So we then have to spend lots of money, and all we're doing is driving up the variation and the total cost of the system. All of these things make it less easy, less stable for us to implement lean. And of course, that classic just do it mindset, JFDI and all that. What's that doing? Well, it's making it so that we're not being valued when we're spending our time learning about the system. Root cause analysis is seen as takes too long. So just go to the direct cause, that'll do. Just put some plasters on around it. So that time, learning time or root cause analysis is often seen as waste. And then the ultimate one, which is is my risk to job. If compulsory redundancy is even a possibility, then why would I get involved in making things work more efficiently? That just doesn't make sense. Why would I put myself at risk? And therefore, it becomes too risky to engage in change, and that one alone can kill an awful lot of engagement and support. So, interested to get your feedback on that, but I just want to give some examples of why MBO actually works against implementation of Lean Six Sigma into the organization. So there we go.
As per, sorry, Sean, just talking over you. So as per Sean's comments there, let us know your experience, your thoughts, your feelings towards this stuff. We're really interested in understanding where you're at and your response to this and what it's like within the organizations that you're working currently, those you've worked in the past. Let us know, drop some comments into the chat, and we will discuss that as we go forward. I've just had a question on the Q&A desk, just checking in that the session is being recorded. Yes, it is. And we will be sharing that with everyone that's registered next week, also available on our YouTube channel straight after this session as well, which you can find all of those social channels from our website, pmi.co.uk.
Message from our advertisers there.
I know, sounded good, didn't it? It's because I've got this. It's because I've got this freestanding microphone in front of me. It's making me lean into it.
Yeah,
and my voice has changed.
Excellent. Right. Thank you very much. Okay, so I asked the question right at the beginning: why do Toyota consultants struggle with lean outside of Toyota? And I think this is what we reached. We're sitting in that coffee room with Charlie. This is what we reached as our conclusion. It's primarily because the change processes that they were using, that Charlie was using, presupposed that the root causes and the waste and the variation coming from the management system had already been addressed. And in Toyota, where he'd worked before, that was true. In the bank where he was working, and nearly everywhere else, it is not true. And that's a really interesting thing. Because what that means for most of us is this. What we need to do with our lean approaches is factor in and deal with the root causes from within our management system, potentially as the top priority for removal, because they're the ones that are affecting all of our value streams right across the business, both external facing value streams and the internal value streams that are supporting things. So the problem is that's far from easy, because how many managers want to put their hands up and say, you know what, we're the root cause of the problems in the business? Or if not me personally, my predecessors. That's really difficult. Remember about that removing the blame culture. That's not just blame culture in the front line. That's the whole space has to be open to the acceptance of the fact that the way we're running the business might be the problem, not the processes themselves, or at least superficially, not superficially, the wrong word. The processes themselves need to change, but we won't be able to successfully change them and sustain the improvement until we've changed the way we manage the work. So let's have a look at what's going on here in a bit more detail. What are managers doing? What's the management system doing that's causing these problems? What are the breaks and barriers that, because we've adopted MBO as our most common, internationally, the most common form of management, what's that doing for us? So I've got another poll here just to keep you all awake, Friday afternoon and all that. Now this one is multiple select, so you can tick everything if you want, just a few if you want, add in some others by just typing in the comment space. But which, if any, of these do you experience in your organization? For example, relying on expert-led or small teams for change, focusing on arbitrary targets for selecting what you're going to change, allowing compulsory redundancies, cost-cutting, prioritizing cost reduction as the goal, not understanding the underpinning logic of Lean Six Sigma, not accepting responsibility for the issues being there in the first place. Which of these do you spot in your organization?
Okay, so I'm just launching that. I don't know about keeping the audience on their toes, keeping me on my toes with all these polls, Sean.
I know.
So hopefully you can start seeing those. It is multiple choice. Just repeat.
Select as many as you want.
And I should say, we're not making a judgment as to whether any of these are good, bad, or otherwise. It's a question as to just getting a feel of what's going on in your organizations and your experience. So I will just allow you to have a good read of those, where there's 7 options. It's definitely making sure you're still awake. Same on the live streams. Anyone that's joining us there, pop your responses into the chat. I can see several of you have been interacting with us on those live streams on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. Great to have you with us. Okay, so give that another few seconds. And my clock's just reset, so hopefully that didn't reset for everyone either. Okay, so let's wrap that up. And I'll share the results on screen now. Okay, digest those, please, Sean.
Will do. Yep. So just looking at the spikes here. So we've got prioritizing cost reduction as the goal. And that's a really good example of management by objective, as we were saying, thinking in action. Next up, we've got a split between arbitrary targets for selecting priorities and not accepting responsibility. So what we can see here is you start building this up as a picture. What I wanted this to do is to illustrate to people that the issue of the management system is in fact multi-aspect. It's not just one bit of the system that's affecting it. It's every aspect of it. How do we set up the projects? How do we select which projects we're going to do? What the goals are? Why we're doing it in the first place? Do we understand what we're doing? Do we understand why we need to do it? All of these things. Yeah, and I could have made this poll at least another 30 items long, and I wouldn't have exhausted the options. I know that, right? But I wanted people to be able to experience the fact that in every organization, some things are going to be better, some things are going to be worse, and all organizations are successful to some extent. Even if they're on their last legs, they're still producing some kind of value. That's not without doubt in my mind. But the crucial thing here for me is the fact that the question is to what extent does the management system enable you to implement your changes, and to what extent does it resist you because of its own internal logics? So I'm sorry for this team, but on a Friday afternoon, I know some of you are engineers, so you'll already be familiar with this, but I'm going to do a quick physics lesson for those of you not already physics trained people. And that is, I'm going to introduce the idea of the coefficient of friction, which is stolen directly from physics here. This is the formula. The coefficient of friction, mu, is F is the resistive force, but in this case, I'm saying it's the resistive force of your existing management system. And N is your ability, your energy for change, your capability for change. And this is a really interesting thing to bear in mind, because if mu equals naught, what that means is there's next to no resistive force. The management system is no way holding you back from change, and all of your energy can then go into finding the best possible solutions. So mu equals naught, your energy is going into the solution and how to improve the system. If mu equals 1, you are literally going nowhere, because 100% of your energy will get resisted by the management system. Yeah, and I'll mention in a moment a chap by the name Peter Scott Morgan, and this is one of his rules of change is am I going to be allowed to change? And surprising how often management systems resist their own changes. So let's think about what we can do about this. Let's start moving into the practical value space. So there's an old favorite, I'm sure you've seen this many times, the Ishikawa cause and effect diagram, sometimes known as the Fishbone Diagram. Let's see if we can use that same tool to surface what are the contributors to mu. So we start on the right with our fish head. What is our management system? What in our management system is causing resistance to our change or our Lean Six Sigma success? And then we can use our standard fishbone categories, or you might add more. You know how to do this tool probably. If not, please do look them up. An incredibly useful tool to get people to sit down and work together to say, specifically, what is it about our management system? How do we measure? How does the management system measure success? What problems that causing us? And we saw that in the poll. What is it about our people? Is it their understanding? Is it their mindset? Is it their priorities? What about the environment? Yeah, what's the management environment? Is it an open one or is it a blame-driven one? The materials that we use, which might in this case be the data and how the data is presented, the methods and so forth, the machines, in this case, the machine of decision making might be how the organization has set up its management meetings and so on. So just have a quick pause for thought there. So the crucial thing for here is what I'm trying to say in this whole document here is that the resistance of the system is an overhead on your change efforts. So how do you measure the resistive force of the management system? Well, it's how does it feel? Does it feel like you've got a fair wind pushing you along, or does it feel like you're having to stop constantly and resurface, remanage, re-corral the troops, or go and fill in lots of reporting systems because the managers won't leave their office, and so on and so forth. So you can use quite a qualitative feeling for how you measure that resistive force. Energy for change, of course, is about yourselves as people and your team around you. Are you up for it? Are you excited about it? Have you dedicated that time and saying, you know what, I love my Friday afternoons because they're change time, and these are the things to think about. And it's a qualitative thing to measure, obviously. Rich, I saw you just pop up there for a second. Was there something for me?
Yes, you were answering it as the question came in. So
Okay.
it's about it was a question from Mark, and it's how do you measure the FNN forces?
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I was very aware as I came back on screen. You were in the process of answering the question.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Mark, for that question. That's great to have. And as an external, I'm very clear with my clients up front to say, look, I'm here to help you. I'm here to provide value to you and to your teams. But I need you to be part of this as well. I need your involvement. I need you and I to work together as a team to get this thing to happen. Don't just say, oh, we've hired some consultants in to get it done, because I will come back to you. If that coefficient is over half, I ain't going anywhere. It's just too painful for me, too painful for the team. I can't help you with that project, and people need to understand that. Okay, so hopefully that's a useful thing to think about, but notice that tool there, the Fishbone Diagram, the Ishikawa cause and effect diagram, really useful. And as you can see, it's going to be a key input to the process I want to introduce you to. So how do we get on top of this? I mentioned earlier that this is not easy. It isn't easy. Culture change is never easy. However, there is this really useful thing that sits within culture, which is our values. And the more of us who come to learn and understand about Lean and Six Sigma and the values that sit behind that, the more we want our organizations to be a place where those values can thrive rather than be seen as fringe or so those of you who said, yes, it's natural in my organization to work this way, somehow you've managed to align your values with your system, and that's brilliant to see. Really encouraging. So I'm just going to give you a case study here. I mentioned Peter Scott Morgan. This is something he back many years ago introduced me to, and it's really, really useful. Used it many times since. And here's the idea. So imagine this is based around a typical US large corporate, but in fact I've spoken to plenty of companies around Europe, etc., that's just the same. And you speak to the managers in such a company, and they say, we want the best and most dynamic people in our management team. That's how we're going to succeed. And that surface level, that sounds absolutely fine. And then another thing they say is, we need our managers to have a really good broad knowledge of the company. So we need them to have worked around different departments, so they've got that breadth of knowledge. And again, you go, yeah, I get that. I nod my head to that. That makes sense. I applaud the goal. Now, flip the perspective. I'm now the person who's a new manager coming in at the bottom rung, maybe on an apprentice scheme or some kind of postgraduate fast track, something like that. And I'm going to be the next big thing. I want to be the top dog. I want to be a successful person in my career. And again, fair enough. That's not for everybody, but for some people, that's what they want. And that's why they've chosen this company to join. So they basically want to become as successful as possible, as quickly as possible, because they're dynamic. And that's great. And then what they do, they get in and they sort of read the ley lines and the runes and how does it all work around here? What they're trying to do is establish what are the rules for success. And they find out about this broad knowledge of the company. And so, right, that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that broad knowledge of the company as quickly as possible. So I'm going to target that. So that means what I need to do is move from department to department as quickly as possible. Because if, let's say, there's 10 departments I need to be in, and I stay for each one for 6 months, oh dear, that's 5 years. Oh, I want to be faster than that. So that's the question, is how do I get around each department as quickly as possible? But they're not going to accept that I've finished that department until I've been seen to make a difference, because otherwise I was just passing through. I haven't got any story to tell. I haven't made a name for myself. So what I need to do is, as soon as I arrive in the new department, what I'm going to do is change the most obvious thing, which, by the way, is usually just putting back the thing the previous manager just changed. And what I'm going to do is shout about how successful that was by only focusing on any upside data, which unfortunately gives us this result. The operating processes are frequently disrupted. The variation in the system's constantly increasing, or at least maximized, which means the total system costs go up. The workforce is dispirited because they've got no constancy of purpose and no clarity about what's happening. It's like, here we go again. And ultimately, there's no faith in the management team and that breakdown. Interesting. Let me know in the comments whether or not you've ever seen this situation or something like it. It'd be great to know. So the point I'm making here is the original intentions were perfectly sound, perfectly good. We want dynamic, quality people in our management team, and we want them to have a broad knowledge of the company. Unfortunately, the way that got translated into the rules, or what I'm going to call the unwritten rules in the next slide, is this, and we got this path to hell, paved with good intentions, because the rules got translated into actually quite destructive behaviors, entirely down to the management system. Okay, so principle number one here to work with. There are, in every organization without exception, there are two types of rules. Rule type number one is the explicit documented rules. These are the laws of the land, the health and safety standards, maybe some compliance standards, regulator, voice the regulator, etc. Standard operating procedures that you've created for yourselves, and so on. Yeah, the policies and procedures that have been written down. And then you've got the unwritten rules, which sum up as the how we do things around here. And the interesting thing about the unwritten rules is they're actually the more powerful ones. Yeah, if you've ever got to the situation where you've got SOPs, but nobody's following them. Why? Because the unwritten rules overrule them. Yeah, if you've got behaviors, strange behaviors going on, and then when you unpick it, what you'll find is there's some kind of unwritten rule that's driving it. But notice from the slide before, in fact, I'm just going to go back a slide, and I'll just ask you to take a quick screenshot of this, because I want to come back to this point. So I'll just leave that for a couple of seconds. Just take a couple of screenshots, a second for a screenshot that. So I want to come back to this. And the point I really want to focus on here is the fact that at the top, the intentions were good, they're well-meaning. Yeah, there was a positive intent. So, but anyway, back to the unwritten rules. If you could fully document the unwritten rules, fully document them, you would literally have the SOP for your culture. Just think about that for a moment. Standard operating procedure. If you could fully document the unwritten rules, you would have the SOP for your culture. Something to think about. And the thing is, every single one of those unwritten rules would have been good or well-intentioned at some point, even if it's no longer relevant now. So principle number two to help us lever this, and that is culture manages values. Values drive behavior. Behavior gives us our results. So our culture I've defined as our unwritten rules. Our values are what we stand for, and behaviors are how we choose to act. And that's therefore what gives us the results, hopefully the ones we wanted. Okay. But unfortunately, what can happen is things can go wrong because the unwritten rules create unintended consequences. And we end up getting the unintended consequences driving our outcomes rather than the goals we wanted. And if you're wondering what I mean about values, is some of you might say, yeah, but the organizational values are not that great, but mine are good. Mine are in line with the lean principles and trying to improve value for the customer and all these kind of good things. And I say, yes, that's wonderful. And I support that because that's me too. But the question is this, is how easy is it for you to stay within an organization that doesn't share your values? So what happens is if you've got people whose values are better, and I'm using better in the sense of lean versus MBO, in terms of creating value for the customer's sustainable business, then if your values are the lean values and the business values are the MBO, then you will be constantly at odds with your business. And that will go back to coefficient of friction. You're just being worn down all the time. Whereas if you give up and just subsume yourself to the local values and just give in, you may not be happy, and that's going to be causing friction in your soul, in your life, in your home life, and so forth. Coming home and complaining about what work was like today. So this values thing's really, really important because it's your values that determine how you're going to act, but the business will set the culture. So just pause for a moment and think about this, and just, you know, by all means write a comment. It'd be nice if we got one or two that Rich, you could share with me. I'm not worried if not, but it would be good if we could get a couple. Just think for a moment. Think of a repeating problem in your organization that when you think about it, actually the reason it's there is for a good reason. It's just not getting the result we want.
Okay, first one's in, Sean. So competing KPIs and targets between individual managers within a department, and then misaligned KPIs across departments as well. Yeah,
brilliant. So we all understand the benefits of KPIs. Funny enough, MBO again. Here we go. But yeah, they were set for the right reasons, weren't they? Yeah. Why would we set KPIs? Well, the good reason for setting KPIs is so we know what we want to focus on. The perfectly rational reason. And then we've got that competition, which is then creating friction within the organization. Thank you. That's a lovely example.
We have a bonus and remuneration a bonus and remuneration policy that actively encourages poor service to customers.
Yeah. I'm not even going to comment. I'm just going to cry. But yeah. Yeah.
And several comments around silo thinking and functional barriers.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so you've understood what I've said. That's brilliant. Yeah, so we put them in place for good reasons. We put the organizational structure together to make sure there's clear communication, clear accountability, and strangely, the end result of that is we've got the exact opposite. We've got loss of control, and loss of quality between functions. Okay, so I'll just finishing up now. I just want to give you a tool that I've used several times before, and I found it really powerful. What I've done is I've blended the work of Peter Scott Morgan with this chap Peter Wickens, again a 1999 book, this one called Energize Your Enterprise, and I blended those two together. And what I've done is I've also mashed it in with the lean thinking to try and create a relatively straightforward tool to use that hopefully you'll find familiar, and if not familiar as a tool, but familiar as in terms of what you'd need to do to follow it. So I've kept it into a brief summary for today. So funnily enough, we start with doing the as is. This might sound familiar. So what's the as is position in terms of our current values and our current unwritten rules? And for the left side of this equation, I'm mashing the two things together, because in practice, when you're doing this exercise, the two things come out pretty much the same time. So something might come out as a value of the organization. Yes, you can go back and find out what was the unwritten rules to derive that, or you might just jump straight to some unwritten rules because they're fairly obvious. That's fine. I'm just mashing them together because at this stage of the exercise, like an initial process map, you just want it all out there. Okay, so the first bit of this I've already shared with you. Get that Ishikawa cause and effect diagram up and work together on the scope you're interested in, team, department, organization wide, and think about the results that you're currently getting that generalize across all of the work done by that scope, and think about the ones that you don't like and list them out onto your Ishikawa diagram. Then from that, we can do the root cause analysis to find out and drill back to what was the positive practical rationale that led to those decisions or those cultures, those values being put in place. So, for example, we've just heard from some of the team on the call today, about, for example, the bonus schemes. So what was the rationale? What was the positive rationale that led to those incentive schemes that are actually damaging the customers? Because I'm pretty certain good people come to work to come do a good job. When it was designed, that was not its intention. So let's stay on the positive line. So I asked you to go to take a screenshot. Go back to the screenshot again now and just have a look. Do you see at the bottom, we've got the result we don't like. At the top, we've got the positive intention. And that shows you what the output of this process is trying to do. Your Ishikawa will have loads of stuff like we've got on the bottom of that screenshot. And at the top, after you've done your root cause analysis, you're going to have a list. It could be quite a long list of unwritten rules and values that are driving these kinds of outcomes. So therefore, we could then summarize that, just like we're doing in an improvement exercise. We've summarized our root causes. In this case, these are the key values and the rules that are driving those values that are giving us our undesirable results across our system. And then, very importantly, remember, managers are human beings as well, and they need to be respected as well, and they are trying to do a good job. For those of you who are managers on the call, absolutely respect. It's an impossible situation you're normally in, and I want to recognize and you know, it's that removing blame and fear. It works at all levels, and we want to try and make sure that anything that is done, we acknowledge the fact it was attempting to make things better, even if that wasn't the outcome. So let's take time to acknowledge the positive intention. Okay. So, sorry, I'm just going to finish off that. A better theory is needed. That's the crucial thing we're trying to drive at here. So now on to the 2B stage, the values and the unwritten rules that we want for the future. First of all, we list out the values that we want the team, department, or organization to hold. It's much easier to write out the values than the unwritten rules, the new unwritten rules. So you work on the values as your priority here. Then go back to your original list of root causes and find out which of the current values or the unwritten rules are blocking those values from being possible. Then identify new unwritten rules, except for now they're written, which is much more helpful because you can now do it, that you think will be a better theory than the old ones. So you've got a very specific change project on your hands here. We want to stop thinking this way and stop managing this way and start managing this way, because our theory is it'll have fewer unintended consequences. Then you create your action plan for eliminating the old unwritten rules and implementing the new. Remember, it's the unwritten rules that will drive the organizational value. So we do want to be working at the unwritten rules level here as far as possible. There's no point just saying we want to be more customer focused with our values. We need to find the rules that will actually actively improve that rather than damage them, like that example we had earlier about the incentive scheme. And then, of course, remember, now that things are explicit, we can evaluate using Plan, Do, Study, Act to see whether or not those rules have changed or not, and the unintended consequences have gone away or not. And that, in a summary, is a process that hopefully feels quite straightforward to you, using tools and skills that you've probably already got, but using a very different type of data up front. It's entirely qualitative, and it's not easy. The root cause analysis of this can get obviously quite political, for example. So bear in mind all of the necessary safety checks that you'd need to do while doing this. So in summary, sorry, apologies, I've run slightly over time. I did say that it's a big topic to cover. The problem for Charlie was not his understanding of lean methods. He was excellent at those, but it was his understanding of the conditions for a lean culture, in which case those methods will work. Most organizations are using MBO without necessarily understanding that A, it's a management theory that's actually been basically debunked by its owner, and as well, and the risks within the theory, they are well documented, but sadly ignored. Deming's system of profound knowledge is the key to adopting lean, but alongside it, you need to adopt the management principles in your new management system. Sustainable Lean Six Sigma implementation requires reducing that coefficient of management friction towards zero as a priority. The return on investment from that is all change projects can work better. And then the link between cultures, values, actions, and the results you get, unfortunately, is one of those laws of nature. There's nothing you can do to change that. So what it is important to do instead is to make sure those cultural or the unwritten rules and the values that are driven by them are explicit and subject to continuous improvement themselves. And the good news is, just to finish off, it is possible to improve cultural processes, much like any other, once you've got those root causes surfaced. So with that, I'll hand you back to Rich.
Thank you, Sean. Just a very, very quick one, bearing in mind where we are in time-wise. A question from Mark on your previous one of your previous slides. Would a force field diagram be equally useful as a Ishikawa diagram?
Well, the advantage of the force field diagram is it also recognizes against that coefficient of friction. It's also measuring that n on the underneath. Well, I can't remember the numerator, denominator. I can't remember which side it is. But anyway, the point being is with the force field diagram, you would also pick up the things that are working for you. And I think that's a very positive and contribution to this. Mark, yes, absolutely. Brilliant suggestion. Yeah. In fact, I might do that next time. See which I prefer.
Mark says thanks. Cheers, Mark. Thanks for the question. If you could just pop onto the next slide, please, Sean, that'd be great.
There we go.
So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I see my colleagues using a different set of slides to me, so there's some detail missing off here. But you will find the PMI Live launch slides on the launch details and launch programs on pmi.co.uk/webinars. Do look out for that. We'll be sending all the publicity. Follow us on LinkedIn if you don't already. That's where you'll find all the details of our social channels and all the exciting stuff that's coming up in January. So that's number 72. It's a wrap from us for the PMI Friday webinar. Thank you to each and every one of you who's joined us over the past 72 hours of content that we've broadcast. It's been an absolute joy and our privilege to have you with us. Wishing you, your families, and everyone around you a happy, safe and relaxing weekend and festive season coming up. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to seeing you in January.
Christmas all.